May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Please be seated. Every now and then, our collect for the day sums up everything just so nicely. I'd like to review it here. Give us grace, O Lord, to answer readily the call of our Savior Jesus Christ, and proclaim to all people the good news of his salvation, that we and the whole world may perceive the glory of his marvelous works. Answer readily the call, that's one piece, and perceive the glory of his marvelous works. Answer and perceive. There are some things that get in the way of our answering and our perceiving, and Paul kind of cuts right to the heart of that in his letter, his first letter to the Christians in Corinth. He talks about how there can be dissent within communities because communities don't always agree on how everybody fits together or even if everybody fits together. And we've all heard this reading so many times, right? Just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. So we're all together, right? Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. It goes on and on and on. But most of the time when I've been reading this and hearing sermons about it, it doesn't focus on that part as much as it does the next. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor. And on and on. You see, there are two ways that we can stray from this idea of unity. One is to look around at each other and say, oh, well, they don't do what I do, and what I do is so much better and so much more important, right? And actually, when we think about the sermons that we've heard in the past and maybe even preached in the past, that tends to be what I focus on. I tend to say, make sure that you're not looking at your neighbor and saying, I'm more important, I'm better, my gifts are more important, their gifts are lesser. And that is an important piece, right? But Paul actually starts with that piece where we're looking in the mirror and saying, what you do is less important. What you do is not a really big part of what God is doing in this world. See, there are two ways that we can stray. We can look at each other and denigrate the other person's gifts and skills, their contributions, or we can denigrate our own gifts and skills and contributions. And we don't want to do either thing. Now, I'm not in your head, I'm not in your mind, in your soul, right? I hope. You know where you have a tendency to go. When you look at the people around you, do you tend to see people who outshine you and you feel like you want to shrink back? Or do you see people that aren't keeping up and you just want to barrel on ahead? And on your best day, maybe you're seeing how everybody is fitting together, that we're all part of this body, and how wonderful is that. We have our good days too. This is not a sermon about how we're always doing the wrong thing. But it's important that we remember that we all fit in together. That sometimes we need to step up and own our gifts and say, God has called me to do this ministry, and I'm going to do it. I know it's not singing solos in the choir or reading or, whatever, preaching, all the fancy stuff, the stuff that, the headliners. God called me to do other things behind the scenes. God called me to pray quietly, and no one may ever know that I even do it, but I'm doing it all the same. See, our society has a tendency to base someone's worth on that visible contribution, right? And so when we're very young, we think we can't participate. We think there's nothing that we can offer. We hit our prime. We're dancing, we're rolling, we're contributing, we're participating fully in the life of the church, and then time marches on. We find we can't pick up things as heavy or reach as far. We feel like our usefulness may be waning. And then we start to shrink back. And when we do that, society says, well, if you can't participate, then you're not worth anything. And that's tragic. Because God is here calling us at every moment to something wonderful. God is calling us wherever we are and whenever we are to participate, to offer our gifts. And they're not the same in every stage of our life, but they are there. It just changes. I remember when I was a kid going to summer camp at Camp Webb, which was the diocesan youth camp for the Diocese of Milwaukee. And I loved going to camp, and I learned so much, but some of the things that I remember are almost a little bit silly. I remember having our Eucharistic services on the beach with the lake behind the celebrant. And what I remember most about that was not getting the sacrament. I remember digging my toes in the sand during the service. I remember the altar that they used was a canoe that was overturned and up on like two carpenter horses. But those were wonderful moments. I remember how each of the little groups of cabins had names. I often landed in Gethsemane. That was where I learned how to pronounce Gethsemane. But there was Cana and Gethsemane and Nazareth and on and on. But they had guest preachers come, the guest clergy for the week or the day or whatever. I forget exactly how it was organized. But I remember one sermon especially. There was a deacon, I think she was a deacon. And I locked into this sermon. She talked about a lesson that had happened the day before, and I forget if it was a bribe or a reward or an object lesson or what it was, but all the kids we got candy at the end of the lesson. And then they dismissed us, and we ran up the stairs, those stairs that are sort of built into a hillside that go down to a lakefront, like the railroad ties that are like jammed in to keep erosion from doing too much. And the deacon talked about being among the last to go. And as she walked up the steps, that she saw all the trash that us kids had ripped off of our candy and thrown all over the place. So she started picking it up as she went along. And in this sermon, she talked about this little girl who came up next to her and started to pick up also. And by the time they both got to the top of the hill, she looked down at the little girl. I remember this phrase. She reached out her hands and she said, and her little hands were full. And I remember that sermon because I was the little girl. And part of me remembered it because I was offended that she thought I was so little. Like her little hand, like I was probably 11 or 12. I mean, I wasn't like 5. I don't think. But the other thing that stuck with me was that I had no idea that she was going to talk about that event the next day. I was just leaving also, and I saw this lady picking up trash, and I would have felt terrible if I had just run past her and let her keep doing that. So I joined in, because my mama raised me right? I didn't mean to blunder into this deacon's sermon, but there I was. I saw her doing her thing, and I joined in. She saw that and put it in a sermon 30 years ago. And now I'm preaching about it today. We don't know what our impact is. We don't know how we are perceived. We don't know how the people around us see what happens and are inspired. I remember here at Trinity a couple years ago, a couple is more than two now. I mean, with COVID, it's all a blur, right? So this had to be, 6 or 7 years ago now. There was a young person in the parish who said, I want to do what that person does. I'm like, which person? Oh, her up at the front. And she was talking about another teen who was an acolyte, that she wanted to learn how to acolyte because she saw another young person doing it. We don't know what our impact is. But God forbid we look at what God has given us, all of our physicality, our intellect, our talents, our gifts, our skills. God forbid we look at that beautiful package and say, oh no, I couldn't. Because you can. God is calling you to something. And yes, things are different as we travel through this life. I'm looking at people in a pretty vast age range here, and I have no idea who's even online right now. Sure, if you're in your 80s, you're not going to do the same thing that you did in your 60s or 40s or 20s. It doesn't mean that you're done. Because you are still loved, still valued, still precious, and still able to contribute, still able to participate. And it doesn't matter at what age, if you feel like you can't do enough or you've already done it, check that box, I can retire. Well, yeah, maybe you can retire from that thing that you were doing, but you're not retiring from ministry altogether. Don't you dare. Because God still needs us to be praying for each other, loving each other, giving advice, mentoring. You're not done. I'm not done. We are not done. Not yet. So, whether you feel like a hand or an eye or a foot or an appendix, my first year here, I got my gallbladder out. Yeah, I know sometimes we feel like we're not that essential, but you are. God doesn't make trash. God makes beautiful, wonderful people. And yeah, no one person, I don't think, is going to solve poverty or racism or ageism or ableism or sexism or isms. But we all can continue to work together to make this world a better place, to show this world God's love. What are we supposed to do? What does our collect say? Let's see if I can scroll and find it. Proclaim the good news to all people, the good news of his salvation, that the whole world may perceive the glory of his marvelous works. Tell people about that. Tell people about what God has done for you. And remember that as you move through this world, people are watching. People are learning about Christ through what you do. You're showing God's love, for better or for worse. We're not always aware of the impact that we have, but that impact is there. So whether it means stepping up or encouraging somebody else in their gifts, go do that. Be the body of Christ. Remember that you are loved, and tell the world about God's marvelous works.